Here is the complete cinematic story, written as one continuous emotional journey with a strong hook, rising tension, redemption, and a satisfying ending. The biggest man at the Billionaire's private security tryout laughed so hard that several candidates turned to watch, but nobody was laughing 10 seconds later. One moment, 37-year-old Everett Cole stood quietly in his faded work jacket while a 6'7" former heavyweight fighter towered over him, and the next, the giant was flat on his back, staring at the ceiling with the wind knocked completely out of him. The arena went silent. Everett didn't celebrate. He simply offered the fallen man his hand, looked toward the billionaire watching from the balcony, and said calmly that he hoped the man was all right. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change a person's life, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can keep bringing you stories that remind us what people are capable of. Everett had not come to the billionaire's estate expecting to impress anyone. He had come because his 8-year-old daughter, Maisie, needed him to try. 3 months earlier, Everett had lost his job at a small private security company after the business shut down unexpectedly. Before that, he had spent years working security at warehouses, office buildings, and public events, but none of it had made him rich, and none of it had given him much security of his own. He was a single father, and every decision he made carried the weight of another human being. His daughter was the reason he got up before sunrise, the reason he kept going when his bank account became frighteningly small, and the reason he refused to let embarrassment become an excuse. That morning, before Everett left their modest apartment, Maisie had slipped a folded piece of paper into his jacket pocket. She had drawn him wearing a superhero cape, standing beside her beneath a bright yellow sun. Underneath, in uneven handwriting, she had written, "Daddy, you don't have to win. Just don't give up." Everett had smiled when he saw it, but he had to turn away for a moment because his eyes had filled with tears. The tryout was being held at the private training compound of billionaire investor Harrison Vale, a man whose name appeared regularly in business magazines and whose personal security team was considered one of the finest in the country. Harrison had received threats after acquiring several major companies, and he was searching for a new head of personal protection. The position came with a salary Everett could barely imagine, medical insurance, housing assistance, and enough stability to change Maisie's life completely. But hundreds of applicants had arrived, many of them decorated military veterans, professional fighters, former federal agents, and elite bodyguards. Everett looked around at the candidates and immediately knew he was different. His shoes were older. His jacket had been repaired at the elbow. He didn't have impressive medals or an expensive training record. He had only years of practical experience, a strong instinct for danger, and the lessons he had learned from protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. As the candidates gathered on the training field, a broad-shouldered man named Brock Harlan stood near Everett and looked him over with obvious amusement. Brock had competed professionally in heavyweight fighting and had spent years working private security for celebrities. He was enormous, confident, and surrounded by men who treated him like the obvious winner. When Brock noticed Everett's worn jacket, he smirked and asked whether he had accidentally wandered into the wrong building. Everett didn't respond. He had learned a long time ago that every argument didn't need an answer. Brock continued making jokes, pointing out that Everett looked more like a tired father picking up groceries than someone qualified to protect a billionaire. A few candidates laughed. Everett simply adjusted the strap of his training bag and looked toward the field. What none of them knew was that Everett had spent the last 8 years learning something far more difficult than how to throw a punch. He had learned how to stay calm when his daughter was sick. He had learned how to stretch a grocery budget when the refrigerator was almost empty. He had learned how to keep fear out of his voice when Maisie asked whether they were going to lose their apartment. He had learned that panic made people careless and that courage wasn't the absence of fear. Courage was choosing to move forward while fear was screaming at you to stop. Everett had also learned that protecting someone wasn't about proving that you were the strongest person in the room. It was about noticing danger before everyone else noticed it, understanding people, controlling your emotions, and doing whatever was necessary to get another person safely home. The first tests involved endurance, balance, reaction speed, and emergency response. Everett didn't dominate any single category, but he consistently performed near the top. He noticed small details that other candidates ignored. During a simulated evacuation, he immediately recognized that one exit had been intentionally blocked, even though nobody had announced it. During a vehicle protection drill, he positioned himself between the protected individual and the likely threat before the other candidates had even understood the scenario. When an evaluator pretended to collapse, Everett didn't simply rush forward. He checked the surroundings first, identified a potential secondary threat, and then moved the injured person to safety. Harrison Vale watched everything from the observation platform, saying almost nothing. Then came the final physical assessment. The candidates were told that they would face a series of controlled defensive challenges, and Brock was selected as the final opponent for several of them. One by one, candidates struggled against his strength. Brock was fast for his size and powerful enough to send trained men stumbling backward. When Everett's name was called, laughter started again. Everett walked into the center of the training mat and looked across at Brock. Brock cracked his knuckles and smiled as though the outcome were already decided. The evaluator reminded both men that the exercise was controlled and that the objective was to neutralize the opponent, not injure him. Everett nodded. Brock nodded too, but his expression suggested he wanted more than a technical victory. The signal sounded. Brock charged. Everett moved. It happened so quickly that several people didn't understand what they had seen. Everett stepped aside at the exact moment Brock committed his weight, redirected his momentum, caught his arm, and used Brock's own forward movement against him. Brock hit the mat with a tremendous thud. Everett immediately released him and stepped backward. Silence spread across the field. Brock tried to rise, but his breath had been knocked out of him. Everett extended his hand. Brock stared at it, stunned. For the first time that morning, nobody laughed. Harrison Vale leaned forward from the balcony. Everett helped Brock stand, but Brock's pride had been hurt far more than his body. He walked away without taking Everett's hand again. Everett didn't chase him. He simply returned to his place. Then something unexpected happened. Harrison ordered the final evaluation stopped. The candidates assumed Everett had won, but Harrison wasn't interested in the takedown. He asked Everett why he had helped Brock up instead of celebrating. Everett looked toward the balcony and explained that a person falling down didn't automatically make him an enemy. He said he had a daughter who had taught him something important: being strong meant knowing when you could help someone and choosing to help anyway. The word seemed to affect Harrison more deeply than Everett expected. Harrison came down from the platform and approached him personally. Instead of asking about his fighting skills, Harrison asked Everett about his daughter. Everett's expression immediately softened. He explained that Maisie was 8, loved drawing, hated broccoli, and believed every dog deserved a name even if it already had one. Harrison smiled faintly. Then Everett noticed something unusual. Harrison wasn't looking at him like an employer anymore. He was looking at him like a man who recognized something familiar. Harrison eventually revealed that he had once had a daughter too. Her name had been Clara. She had died several years earlier after Harrison became consumed by business and convinced himself that providing money was the same thing as providing love. By the time he realized the difference, he had already lost the chance to repair it. Since then, Harrison had surrounded himself with security, wealth, and people who were paid to be near him, but none of those things had made his home feel less empty. That was why he was looking for a new bodyguard. Not simply someone capable of fighting. He needed someone who understood that protecting a person meant protecting their humanity too. But the story did not end with Everett getting the job. Harrison gave him one final challenge. The candidate would have to protect Harrison during a realistic daytime public security simulation involving crowds, distractions, vehicles, and multiple staged threats. Everett passed it with almost frightening precision. He spotted the first threat before it developed. He redirected Harrison away from a compromised entrance. He noticed a disguised evaluator watching from a service corridor. Most importantly, he never once treated Harrison like luggage that needed to be moved. He communicated clearly, respected Harrison's decisions, and maintained awareness of everyone around them. When the exercise ended, Harrison offered Everett the position. Everett stood there quietly. Then he asked one question. Would the job allow me enough time to be a father? Harrison paused. It was the question nobody else had asked. Most candidates had asked about salary, benefits, travel, and authority. Everett had asked about his daughter. Harrison told him that if he hired Everett, being a good father would never be considered an inconvenience. In fact, Harrison said he wanted someone who still understood what mattered outside the walls of wealth. Everett accepted. But before leaving the compound, he found Brock sitting alone near the training facility. Brock looked embarrassed. His pride had been badly bruised, and he expected Everett to walk past him. Instead, Everett sat beside him. Brock admitted that he had spent years believing his size was the only thing that made him valuable. He had mocked Everett because seeing another man succeed without intimidation made him uncomfortable. Everett listened without judging him. Then he told Brock that strength wasn't something a person proved by making everyone else feel small. Brock looked down. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Brock apologized. Everett accepted. That moment mattered more to both men than the fight had. Weeks later, Everett began working for Harrison. The job was demanding, but it gave him something he hadn't had in years: stability. Maisie moved into a better home with her father, and for the first time she had a small bedroom with enough sunlight for her drawings. Harrison occasionally visited, initially because he needed security assistance, but gradually because Maisie's optimism had become something he desperately needed. One afternoon, Maisie showed Harrison the drawing she had made before Everett's tryout. The billionaire studied the picture of Everett wearing a superhero cape. He asked Maisie why she had drawn her father as a superhero. Maisie smiled and said that superheroes weren't people who never got scared. They were people who kept going because someone needed them. Harrison became quiet. The little girl had unknowingly described the lesson he had spent years avoiding. Months passed, and Harrison began changing. He started leaving work earlier. He visited a community center in Clara's memory. He created scholarships for children who had lost parents. He even reached out to people he had pushed away during the years when business mattered more than relationships. Everett never told him how to live his life. He simply showed him through example. Brock changed too. He started volunteering at youth boxing programs, teaching teenagers discipline rather than aggression. He often joked that Everett was the only man who had ever knocked him flat without making him feel humiliated. And Everett changed in ways he never expected. He stopped seeing himself as a struggling single father who was always one emergency away from losing everything. He began seeing himself as a man who had survived difficult years without becoming bitter. He realized that his greatest strength had never been his ability to drop a giant opponent in seconds. It had been the ability to stand back up every time life knocked him down. One afternoon, nearly a year after the tryout, Harrison asked Everett to accompany him to a charity event. Hundreds of people were gathered outside in the bright afternoon sun. Children were running across the lawn, families were eating together, and volunteers were handing out school supplies. Harrison looked around and quietly admitted that he had once believed money could protect him from loneliness. Everett told him that money could build walls, but only people could build bridges. Harrison smiled. Then he looked toward Maisie, who was helping younger children draw pictures on a long table. He said that Everett had protected him that first day without even realizing it. Everett asked what he meant. Harrison explained that Everett hadn't just protected his body during the security test. He had reminded him that there were still good people in the world. People who could be strong without being cruel. People who could lose without becoming bitter. People who could forgive without pretending the hurt never happened. Everett looked toward his daughter. Maisie caught his eye and lifted the same old superhero drawing she had made before the tryout. It was now taped inside a plastic folder, slightly wrinkled around the edges. Everett smiled. He didn't need a cape. He had his daughter. He had a second chance. And he had finally discovered that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't being the strongest person in the room. Sometimes it was being the kindest one. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before you go, leave a comment telling us what you believe real strength means. Is it the power to defeat someone, or the courage to lift them back up after they fall? Because sometimes the person everyone mocks for being weak is the very person who has survived the most, loved the deepest, and learned the greatest lesson of all, that strength isn't measured by how hard you can hit, but by how much kindness you can carry after life has hit you.